Welcome to Building Memories, a heritage audio trail which captures, preserves and shares interesting historical facts and social memories of local people about selected buildings and locations around Leigh Town Centre. This commentary has been edited together from facts and memories supplied and recorded by members of the Healthy Arts Memorably Local History Reminiscence Group, supported by additional historical research completed by Group Facilitator Julie McKiernan. Audio Trail 2, King Street to St Helens Road and back, walking south along King Street.
Our second trail begins outside Barclays Bank, which straddles Railway Road and King Street. The Barclays Bank building replaced a block of older buildings which were demolished in 1898 to widen Railway Road. It is built in the Italian Renaissance palazzo style and was originally the Manchester Union Bank. Next to it stand the remains of a Victorian terrace, which used to house Hanson's chemists and a tobacconist.
Go round the corner into King Street and stop at the corner of Downing Street. In the 18th century, King Street was known as the Broad Causeway, or the Walk, because it was the widest road in town and was, as part of the Turnpike Road, well maintained. Leigh's Downing Street doesn't have a number 10 anymore, but number 13, which is the only property that survives, and was originally the bank manager's house. The empty Grade 2 listed Yorkshire Bank building was originally built for the Manchester and Liverpool District Bank around 1900. Its coat of arms can still be seen. The ship motif relates to the Manchester Ship Canal linking the two cities. Adjoining this are three late Georgian-style buildings which have been occupied by dentists for many years and used to house a school clinic upstairs.
Walk to the end of the block and stand at the top of Hildon Street. On or around this site, next to the stocks, stood the 17th century stone jug, which was a windowless lock-up with simple benches and a few small air holes. It was demolished when the Home Secretary condemned it as not fit for a dog to be in. In 1840 it was replaced with a police station and magistrates' court, which was purchased by the new Leigh Local Board in 1875 to become the town hall. Concerts, plays and society meetings were also regularly held in the upstairs assembly room. Downstairs once housed a butcher's, Sidney Miles Gents Outfitters and later Leigh Furnishing Stores.
I remember Sidney Miles. It was a good shop selling off-the-peg clothing, but you could also have adjustments made there. Example, your trousers shortened.
We were doing the electrics at Leigh Furnishing Stores and discovered that there was a small yard at the back onto Hildon Street. This had a private door going down into the cellar, which had 3 storerooms and an old office. I thought this would be a great base for my business, so I came to an agreement with the owner. We cleared it all out and painted the storerooms, and were just taking the old damaged plasterboard off the office wall when one of the lads shouted. I ran in to find a full cow's skull, complete with horns, looking like a prop from a cowboy film, lying in the desert sand. What a shock! It must have fallen through from the butcher's shop above.
The National Union of Mine Workers, or NUM office, at 2 to 4 Hildon Street, and the Leigh Miners' Welfare Institute off Twist Lane are all that remain of the once thriving coal industry in Leigh. In 1851 there were 17 active pits in Leigh. Parsonage Colliery was the last pit to open in 1920 and also the last to close, alongside Bigshaw Colliery in 1992. Hildon Street used to continue behind this block, but the old terrace which once housed handloom weavers and the local chimney sweep was condemned and demolished in 1966.
Continue along Market Street to King Street Methodist Church. The current building dates from 1974. It replaced the former stone-built Gothic Wesleyan Methodist Chapel of 1871 with its 150-foot spire. Land in this area was formerly used for such cruel sports as bull baiting, cockfighting, baiting the badger or the polecat. The pub next door is a relatively new incarnation of what was once a furniture store. Next door's smaller, squat building was previously a small indoor market with a cafe, but prior to that it was the Victoria Billiard Hall, a place that George Platt avoided.
I recollect being warned not to visit the billiard hall, deemed to be a den of iniquity, where swearing and betting took place. Betting was unlawful in those days, other than on the racecourse. Nevertheless, this did not stop illegal betting taking place.
The Eagle and Child replaced a much earlier Cock Inn built around 1795, which took its name from nearby cockpits. It used to have the Stanley family coat of arms of an eagle with a baby in its nest in each window, so it was renamed the Eagle and Child in 1848. The current building is from around 1895.
Stand on the corner of Twist Lane. Losing its two railway stations meant that Leigh has come to depend more on cars for transport, so its roads have had to be developed to accommodate them. Twist Lane was widened in the early 1990s. Unfortunately, in the process, a lot of very old and much-loved properties had to be demolished, including the Royal Oak Pub on the corner and the Live and Let Live pub at the top of Twist Lane, whose front door virtually opened onto the road. The Royal Oak dated back to at least 1779 and used to provide lodgings for the gentry connected with the canals. In 1838, Henry Worsley of Wesley Lodge ordered landlady Alice Latham to heat a pan of copper coins, which he then threw to the lads outside, causing a commotion. Worsley was arrested and thrown in the stone jug. In 1903, the corporation rebuilt the back premises and urinal, anticipating a turning point for the extension of the tramway down Twist Lane, but it was never built.
Cross Twist Lane and walk to the bottom of the bridge. On the site of the Aldi supermarket, backing onto the canal and fronting Smithy Street, stood one of the first bowling alleys in the northwest. Universal Bowling opened its second centre, built by George Moss and Sons in Leigh, in 1964. It was an 18-lane centre equipped with AMF lanes and machines. This building replaced a row of much older properties which included Urmston's Mineral Waterworks, Loudon's Tea and Provisions Dealer and two lodging houses.
In the early 1900s, the Armstrong Lodging House at number 72 was run by Thomas and his wife Eliza. They had no children, but they had 84 lodgers, all male. Did they employ the proverbial clothesline for them all to sleep on? I remember temping bowling at the Universal Bowl as a member of two teams, Me's Jets and Gaskell's Rascals, on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. Very pleasant times cut short when Universal got into financial difficulties.
In 1795, the Duke of Bridgewater's Canal was extended from Worsley to Pennington. The bridge opened in 1820 after a lengthy debate about the gradient of the approach road. The steeper the gradient, the less the stretch of road to be maintained by the canal companies. In 1821, the Bridgewater Canal was linked to the Leigh branch of the Leeds and Liverpool Canal.
Kebbing was usually carried out by lads in their early teens to make some pocket money. A keb was made out of a pair of drop-down back handlebars covered with chicken wire to make a basket. This was used to dredge small amounts of coal out of the canal after the tipper truck had been. The tipper trucks came from the collieries bringing coal, which was tipped into the barges. Invariably, Some coal was tipped over the side of the barge, and boys or men were waiting with their kebs, a sack to put the coal in and a bag to wheel it home on. This must have been marvellous exercise, as the keb would have to be thrown right across the canal.
Walk over the bridge and stop at Diamond Street. The Centurion Pub, named after Lee Rugby League Club, was formerly the Ellesmere, and even earlier the Boathouse. It was already established in 1819 when the bridge was built, but the landlords were clearly confused by its address. In 1819 it was given as Warrington Road. In 1824 it was recorded as being King Street, but in 1828 the landlord settled on Diamond Street. The road it faces was known as Warrington Road in the early 19th century before becoming Pennington Road and finally St Helens Road.
Cross Diamond Street and walk down to the Britannia Pub on the corner of Heatherstone Street. A moated medieval hall once stood at the end of what was then called Porter's Lane. In 1826 a new hall was built by cotton broker Thomas Jones, who went on to develop much of Heatherstone Street. The hall was pulled down in 1908 and its farm sometime between 1972 and 1985, leaving behind only Rothwell's Wood. On the corner of Heatherstone Street stood Stone House, built in 1825 by William Fairclough. It passed on to his son John, a stone merchant who went on to become the first mayor of Leigh in 1899. It was later occupied by medical practitioner James Hayes, whose family founded mills in West Leigh. The house was then bought by the Borough Council and became a maternity home, nursery and clinic, which prompted some very vivid memories.
My eldest sister was born there when it was a maternity home in 1930. I can remember going there for an injection as a child, but I don't know what it was for. My memory of the needle was that it was big and thick and it went into the vein in the crook of my arm. Afterwards we were given a couple of dolly mixtures for being brave.
The school dentist referred me to Stonehouse because I had 2 second teeth coming through over obstinate milk teeth. I recall waiting while child after child was called through to see the dentist, but none came back. I was a little worried that this might be some bizarre orthodontic child kidnapping scheme, but eventually it was my turn. I was given gas to knock me out while they removed the offending teeth, and I recall dreaming that I was spinning at high speed round and round the moon, attached to the surface by a very long string of chewed gum. After I came round, they took me through to a recovery room, which was packed full of the missing children.
At Manchester Road Secondary School, a number of us played a rough game of tick and pass during playtimes. One morning a lad's head came up and smacked me hard in the mouth. It took me a moment to come round, and when I did, the other lads gaped at my 2 broken front teeth. I was sent to see the school dentist at Stonehouse the following day. It was a grim building with austere corridors and rooms and less than cheery staff. I was in pain even when dosed up, which inevitably enhanced my feelings of dread. The dentist told me that the rest of the 2 teeth would have to come out and arranged for me to go back the following week to have them removed. After the weekend, I went back in some pain and fear. The dentist arranged me in his chair and his nurse put a large mask over my face. All I remember was a strange smell increasing as I dropped off. Some time later, I woke up in pain, and the dentist packed my gums and gave me some strong painkillers. Over the coming week, I recovered and went back to school. But although I returned to playing tick and pass, I always kept my head well out of the way after that.
Cross over Heatherstone Street and continue walking along St Helens Road. Grade 2 listed Fairfield was built in 1845 for mill owner William Hayes and passed to his son Thomas Travers Hayes, who was a Justice of the Peace, the Treasurer of Leigh Union and a regular columnist for the Leigh Chronicle. He was also the first person in Leigh to own a motor car. In the 1960s, Joseph and Gladys Leigh turned Fairfield into a guest house with a bar and restaurant. Christ Church was consecrated in 1854. The church was built as a protest against the vicar of the parish church, James Irvine, who refused to baptise, confirm, marry or bury irregular churchgoers, or those sympathetic towards non-conformist teachings. James Pownall of Pennington Hall was chair of the trustees, who erected and endowed the new church. Cross over Schofield Street and stop in front of Lilford House. On the site of the current Lilford House stood the toll house at the end of Windmill Street. The turnpike toll gate was moved here in 1829 and remained until the bar was removed in 1867 and the houses demolished in 1938. The tolls varied from 1 penny for a single horse, mule or ass, 10pence for a drove of oxen, to 1 shilling and 6pence for a waggon drawn by 6 horses or other beasts. The houses were built from the ruins of a corn mill, hence the street's name. Continue along St Helens Road, cross Derwent Street and continue until you come to the small car park past the shops. The Leigh Loop section of the Kenyon to Manchester railway line used to cross St Helens Road here via a metal bridge. What's left of the former line now forms a linear path to Pennington Country Park. The bridge was affectionately known as the Landry Bridge because it bore advertisements for the bleach company on both sides. When a train passed over, the bridge rattled noisily and the road beneath it often flooded. The Kenyon and Leigh Junction Railway opened in 1831 and became part of the London and North Western Railway in 1846. Regular passenger services ended in 1954 and the line was closed in 1969. The bridge was demolished in 1972.
My brother and his friends used to go train spotting by the bridge. They would go to see the 10 to 9er before running to school.
Down the side of the railway line was a track which led to Grange Street and the Leigh Girls' Grammar School sports pitch. The school in Windermere Road obtained the land in 1932, and the girls had to walk to and from the pitch between classes in all weathers. This journey was particularly unpopular during the summer months, as pupils weren't allowed to eat or drink in the street in school uniform. There was a pavilion offering basic changing facilities and storage. It is now part of the Leigh Sports Village site.
Continuing along St Helens Road to Pennington Hall Park. Pennington Hall Park is named after the grand house which used to stand there. The 2 buildings either side of the park are the former North and South Lodge cottages. The original Pennington Hall belonged to the Pennington family from around 1200, but after a succession of its owners, it was bought by cloth merchant James Hilton, whose son Samuel rebuilt it as a grand Georgian mansion in 1748. In 1807 it was sold to the Gaskell family of Yorkshire, who let it to various tenants including James Pownall, who built the first silk weaving factory in Leigh in 1833. His granddaughter Mary Pownall Bromit would go on to become an international renowned sculptor. The last tenant of the hall was George Shaw JP, the second mayor of Leigh, managing director of Messrs. G. Shaw and Company Limited, Leigh Brewery, and a keen sportsman, churchgoer and philanthropist. Following his death, his son offered to transfer their tenancy of the hall and 5 acres of ground to Leigh Corporation if they agreed to take over the lease. The hall grounds were created via an unemployment relief scheme opened to the public in 1920. The hall opened as a museum and art gallery in 1928, but unfortunately developed dry rot and had to be demolished in 1963.
We used to go to the museum at Pennington Hall. We weren't allowed upstairs, but I once had a peep up the stairs to see where my grandma worked as an upstairs-downstairs maid. The dining room was upstairs, so by the time she'd carried everything downstairs to the kitchen and finished washing up, it was 2 a.m, and then she had to get up again at 5 a.m. to lay all the fires in the bedrooms. She met her future husband there when he came to deliver a telegram.
We spent a lot of time in Pennington Hall, wandering round the fields and playing on the bottom field. We used to go into the hall on the way to the playground. I was always fascinated by the display of glass walking sticks. How on earth could anyone use one? There was also a printing press and a room with stuffed animals, but the most horrific object was the man-trap, which I looked at from a safe distance. The side door led into the conservatory, which was always warm and moist and smelt lovely.
During the Second World War, local school children were asked to design a road safety poster. There was very little road traffic in Leigh at that time, but any vehicles had to direct their lights down onto the road to prevent being seen from above. There was also no street lighting and complete blackout. My contribution, which was a picture of an owl with large eyes, with the caption, "Be wise, use your eyes," went on display at the hall.
As a child growing up in Lawton, we visited the park quite often. I remember a monkey in a cage who used to take peanuts from us and then rub the salt off on his fur. There was also a large cockatoo. I didn't like the stuffed animal heads in the hall, but I did like the models in glass cases. I remember being fascinated by one of an open-top bus. There was a summer house near a huge weeping willow tree backing onto the long red brick wall running along the front of the park on St Helens Road. When the wall was removed in the 60s and the park was opened up at the front, with the lovely winding pathway being created and lots of beautiful daffodils planted, it really was quite special, and it caused quite a stir on the bus when we travelled from Lawton into Leigh. The last time I actually went into the hall was on a visit from King Street Junior School in about 1963. We walked there to see an exhibition of books with lots of illuminated letters and various editions of the Bible. The 1960s saw a lot of changes to our old buildings up and down the country. I often wonder if Pennington Hall would be saved from demolition in this day and age. I like to think that it would, that we value and care about preserving our heritage more nowadays.
Pennington is Saxon. Originally, the boundary ran right up to the Leigh parish church, making it the most industrial of the 4 townships: Pennington, West Leigh, Bedford and Atherton. The Bolton St Helens Turnpike Road ran through Pennington. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, St Helens Road became a very fashionable place for the wealthy middle-class residents of Leigh to build their homes. Use the zebra crossing to cross St Helens Road and start to walk back towards Leigh. The area of open land to your right is Pennington, or St Helens Gardens, and was one of Leigh's miniature parks. Also known as Grass Plat, it was opened around 1909 and, with its seats and flower beds, was welcomed as a halfway house for people returning from a walk to Lowton or through the fields. An outdoor toilet, formerly on the site, was known affectionately as the Green Mist. Stop at Pennington Hall Bridge. The bridge crosses Pennington Brook, which is a tributary of the Glaze Brook or River Glaze. It is 3.464 kilometres long, and although heavily modified and polluted by industry in the past, it now contains chub, perch and roach. The brook used to power a water mill in 1467.
The brook was part of our territory, and we spent many hours wandering through the fields and by the brook, over the rickety bridge and by the farm that led to the beach walk, and then through the fields towards the East Lancs Road. We also went from the park and along the brook to the Flash.
I remember paddling in Pennington Brook as a child, We didn't realise that the sewage got emptied into it at regular intervals.
Continue to the junction with Bonnywell Road. Bonnywell Road is named after the farm whose land it was built on. After the 1930 local slum clearance, Lee Corporation started building the estate that leads off it in 1934. Two of its most famous residents were journalists Linda Lee Potter and Peter Eckersley, head of drama at Granada, who married actress Anne Reid. Francis Derbyshire remembers the May Queen processions.
George Birchall, dressed in cap and gown, organised our processions. We used to parade round Hand Lane and Beach Walk. The Queen always returned with a much bigger bouquet of flowers than when we set off, usually flowers being taken from the gardens as we made our way around. Some children carried tins to collect money from the onlookers, and when we got back it was shared out. We would usually have a bit of a party, then go off to the shops to spend the money on sweets.
Cross over Bonnywell Road and continue along St Helens Road. Cross Newlands Road, and here at number 77 Oaklands lived Peter Heald, a very successful retired butcher and a philanthropist supporter of local Baptist churches. When he died in 1929, he left an estate of over 50,000. Born in Durham, he opened a shop in Chapel Street, but later inherited his father-in-law John Tilsley's business in Branchgate. He was also a manager of the Lee Savings Bank and a director of Alder Spinning Company, but apparently could not tolerate fuss, nor was he fond of company. Continue now to number 73 St Helens Road. Here at Highfield lived James C. Prestwich, Lee architect. He was born in 1852 in Atherton. He attended Lee Grammar School before going to train in London, where he became an architect and developer. He was a fellow of the Manchester Society of Architects and built most of the finest and most important buildings in Lee, as well as designing buildings for other towns. He was one of the oldest members of Lee Cricket Club and a member of the Freemasons. He died in 1940, aged 87. Next door at number 71, Lark Nest, lived James Yates, head of the firm of Messrs. James Yates and Sons, Pork Butchers. He started his business on Market Street, but the offices and slaughterhouses were later moved to Bengal Street and the shop to King Street. By 1929, the firm had become Yates Greer Company Limited.
Continue to the junction with Buck Street. Buck Street was named after Buck's Farm. In 1904, Buffalo Bill's Wild West and Congress of Rough Riders of the World toured Britain and set up their Wild West showground in the large field on the east side of St Helens Road between the railway and the brook. Thousands went to watch the show. Teresa Hunter's memory is slightly less glamorous.
At work, a gorgeous lad, Charlie, who looked like Errol Flynn, asked me to go on a date to the pictures. Whenever I went out, I used to go home down the back to our back gate. But if I lingered too long, my dad used to come out and shout, "It's 10 o'clock, Teresa, time you were in." So desperate not to be embarrassed by my dad, I suggested Charlie walk me home a different route, down the back of Buck Street. There was a thick fog that night, so no one could see us having a good kiss, including the bloke who came down the backs, unzipped his flies and peed all down me, thinking he was aiming at the wall. Charlie didn't say anything, and nor did I just squelched all the way home. Later Charlie joined the army, but when he came home on leave, he decided that he didn't want to go back, so he went AWOL. He hid in the summer house at Pennington Hall, and I took him food until the police came and asked me if I'd seen him. He quickly got tired of hiding and handed himself in, only to be diagnosed with diabetes and discharged on medical grounds.
Continue to the junction with West Bridgewater Street. When brewer George Shaw the last tenant of Pennington Hall was elected mayor in 1900, he promised to bring a new industry to Leigh. So he set up the Anchor Cable Company Limited, named after the rope and anchor, where the meeting was held to form the company in West Bridgewater Street, which manufactured a wide range of cables. The company was purchased by Calendars in 1903 and gradually expanded as it won more government contracts, including an order for all the cabling in the new Cunard liner, the Queen Mary. In 1945, British Insulated and Calendars Cable merged to form British Insulated Calendars Cables Limited, BICC. The BICC tower, which became a local landmark, was used to vulcanise the rubber on large diameter mining cables. In 2000, BICC became Balfour Beatty plc and sold off its speciality cable unit, and the factory was closed in 2001. No traces now remain of many old businesses which once stood in this area, including Platt's butcher's shop. George Platt remembers.
The butcher's shop at 29 and another on Chapel Street were provisioned from an abattoir in a large yard at the rear, where there were stables for Rose, my dad's horse. Rose pulled a large cart from which meat was served. In those days, house-to-house deliveries were the norm for many housewives. Shortly before the war, Rose was replaced by a Jowett van. Every Saturday during the war, I walked along the canal from Butts Bridge to collect our weekend meat ration from Grandad, but he used to make me wait in the shop until all the customers had been served. So one cold day, his housekeeper took me into the living room and asked if I liked some Yorkshire pudding. I didn't know what it was, but she served it with jam and custard, and it was delicious. It came as a complete surprise years later when I saw it served with roast beef.
Continue to the top of the Canal Bridge. The recently demolished Top Bridge Pub was referred to by regulars as Tobin's as late as 1950. The landlord in 1881 was James Tobin. He and his wife, Delia, originally from Tipperary, and the area around Bridgewater Street on the opposite side of the canal in Navigation Street was predominantly an Irish area. To east of the Canal Bridge was Limerick Wharf, and Limerick House stood next to the bridge. The pub was also known as the headquarters of the pre-World War I Leigh Shamrocks Rugby League side. Leigh attracted lots of Irish immigrants during the building of its canals and the Industrial Revolution.
Continue to the bottom of the Canal Bridge. Built around 1795, Grade 2 listed Wild's Passage contains former domestic hand-loom weavers' houses and a 3-storey agent's house at the end. It was originally called Chapel Place as it was situated next to the old Wesleyan Bridge Chapel, but was renamed after John Wild, a canal boatman and lime merchant famous for rescuing people from the canal. The Circle housing block was originally the Bridgewater Hotel. In 1890 it advertised beds for 40 people, dining facilities for 100 and stabling for up to 19 horses. It was also the scene of a drama in 1878.
My great-great-great-grandfather, Richard Tilsley, was 74 and lived with his son John, a pork butcher on Bradshawgate. At 9:30 p.m. on a dark night, he went down Ellesmere Street and accidentally walked into the Bridgewater Canal. 2 men went to his assistance and took him to the Bridgewater Hotel, where Dr. Perrin was sent for, but sadly he never recovered consciousness and died. The coroner's inquest returned a verdict of accidentally drowned. Perhaps Richard had gone to visit his daughter Elizabeth, who lived at the very end of the old town hall building. If he mistook Ellesmere Street for King Street and carried on to the bottom of the street, he could easily have walked straight off the wharf and into the canal.
Continue to the taxi rank near the traffic lights. Lancashire United Tramways trolley buses used to turn round here. The taxi rank office is half of the original enquiry office, which was shaped like a tram.
The most celebrated resident on King Street was Thomas Hayes. His house was near where the trolley bus station was later positioned. He invented a number of spinning machines, not the Jenny, the original one of which was patented by Richard Arkwright after collaborating with Hayes' earlier partner John Kay. When Arkwright sued Manchester manufacturers for infringing his patents, Hayes was called to give evidence that his invention was in use before the application for a patent. Hayes was greatly instrumental in getting Arkwright's petition thrown out.
Spinning Jenny Way was extended and widened in the 1990s, cutting through the former Albion Works and the site of the former Lee Workhouse. This 17th century farmhouse, leased by the town's overseers, was a much-hated place which contained both stocks and a whipping post. When it was demolished and replaced with a new building on Lee Road, George Olivant built 3 shops on the site. The last one featured a tiled window of Spinning Jenny. Perhaps the most famous shop was Tommy Sales, which sold sweets and cigarettes and other essentials. Tommy kept score for Lee RFL Club when they played at Mather Lane. He was playing for the Cableworks amateur team when he was spotted by and recruited to play for Lee. After starting work at 14 in a mill, he joined the Lee Corporation Parks Department at Pennington Hall until he was called up in 1939. On his return, he was seconded to Lee RLFC to develop the new ground, Hilton Park, then trained to teach and specialised in special needs education at St Peter's Junior School, where he later became head teacher. After a spell at Widnes, he returned to Lee and later became secretary and life president of the club. On retiring from teaching, he took over the shop.
My mum had a part-time job at Tommy Sales' shop for a short period. It must have been 1960 because she was pregnant with my brother, who was born in November of that year. I remember my dad taking me up there while she was working. I got to see behind the counter, which I found very exciting. My mum later told me that due to her growing size and limited room behind the counter, every time she opened the till, it would bang into her belly.
Next door to Tommy Sales was the entrance to the Regal Cinema. Situated approximately where Oscar's pub currently stands, Lee's last purpose-built cinema opened in 1938. It was owned by Associated British Cinemas Limited, or ABC, and could accommodate 1,564 people, with 1,068 in the stalls and 496 in the circle. The seats were made from a light oak, upholstered in rose and blue, and the screen was covered with a rich gold curtain. In 1949, the Regal made film history when the European premiere of Command Decision, starring Clark Gable, took place. This was the first time a film had received its British premiere outside London. In 1950, the cinema screened one of the first X-rated films to be shown in the Lee area, Murder, Inc., starring Humphrey Bogart. The cinema closed in 1968 and was subsequently demolished to make way for the new bus station.
I always thought the Regal was the poshest cinema. It had a balcony and you could buy the film magazines and sweets at the ticket booth.
The Art Deco decoration of the Regal made the experience far superior to any modern multiplex. There were always 2 films, an A and a B, preceded by Pearl and Dean adverts, and with an interval after the B film.
I remember seeing Davy Crockett and Robin Hood, dear, but my mother went to the Regal in the 1950s to see Cavan O'Connor, a famous tenor who specialised in Irish ballads. That was when the cinema also presented music acts as well as films.
Which seats you ended up in on a day revealed a lot about the boy's feelings and his bank balance. I remember going to meet a lad at the Regal one night. He said he'd be in a pale blue suit, which was an unusual colour at the time. But because my eyes were bad, I asked my cousin, can you come and spot him for me? She agreed and said, I can see him over there on the corner. So I went over and linked him and said, are we going in? He replied, "I didn't know we were going anywhere, but it's all right by me." It was another lad in a blue suit.
When my boyfriend John was in the army, he wrote to suggest that we go to the pictures when he next came home. We met outside the Regal and he said, "I'll get the tickets." I was halfway up the stairs when I turned to see him stood at the bottom looking up at me. It was 2 and 3 upstairs, but he could only afford the 1 and 9 ones. He was a bit embarrassed and I was a bit disappointed because the double seats were upstairs.
When I was 14, I lived on Chapel Street. I started to go out with my mates on a Saturday night. 2 of my friends used to live up by a fold, so they would catch the Leigh Corporation bus on the way to Leigh, pick up another friend at Butts Bridge, then me at the 3 Crowns stop. We would go to the Corporation bus terminal and meet another friend and then nip and get a pink vinyl for one of the lads. Then it was off to the ABC, Regal Cinema. This was our first stage of adolescence and it was good to have the freedom. But the lad who brought the pink couldn't wait to read it, so he tried and he succeeded while watching the film to read a pink vinyl.
Cross Spinning Jenny Way and continue to the entrance of the bus station. Sandwiched between the entrance and exit of the old Leigh Corporation bus station was the Woolpack, which dated back to 1775. It was the smallest pub in Leigh and it was demolished along with other old properties in the early 1990s to make way for the new bus station.
There was a ladies' outfitters run by the 2 Waddell sisters. One sister, Jane, used to help with our costumes for plays and pantomimes at St. Joseph's. When we men needed tights, she saved us the embarrassment of going elsewhere. She died in the 1980s, and her will revealed that she had made arrangements for her own funeral. Her executor told me that Jane had requested that I do a reading at her funeral mass at Sacred Heart. I willingly agreed, but in the will it stated that I was to be paid a day's wage. Of course, I didn't want any payment, but the request had to be honoured. It was a tradition in the old days that if you needed to have time off work to attend a funeral, your wages would be docked. So I was given a nominal sum, but put it into the collection box at Mass.
My mother was head of the finishing department at Redmond's Bakery on King Street for many years, and when I was at school, she got me a Saturday job in the shop. I learned to weigh and shape butter, and even the secret of Redmond's homemade salmon spread. Most people apparently thought it was the best red salmon, but it was actually tinned pink salmon with butter, salt and pepper, and cochineal, which gave it its lovely colour.
One year, the Lancashire Ladies section of the National Farmers Union had our annual flog-it charity shop in an empty property close to the George and Dragon. We had about a week to make as much money as possible. One day, a scruffy-looking chap came in and bought a pair of wellies. He was looking at a pair of trousers too, but complained that they were too short. "Oh, just tuck them into your wellies and nobody'll know," said one of our ladies in her lilting Irish brogue, a saleswoman par excellence.
Cross the entrance/exit to the Leigh bus station and stop outside the George and Dragon. Leigh's oldest surviving pub from the 17th century is now Grade 2 listed. Originally called the George, it consisted of a house and outbuildings with a bakehouse, orchards and gardens. It could stable 15 horses, feed 40 people and accommodate 2 travellers. It also had an assembly room for concerts, meetings and auctions. Richard Guest, Leigh's man midwife, was born here. The George was always the first meeting place for our regular pub crawl. We had many a good night, particularly singing Irish folk songs.
Continue along King Street to finish this trail at the turnpike. narration and memories were provided by Chris Boyle, Michael Caine, Francis Derbyshire, Lynn and Roy Edmondson, Keith Hindley, Teresa Hunter, Julie McKiernan, Joan Patrick, George Platt, Steve Rogers, Ernie Rothwell, Ralston Whitaker, and Frank and Julie Woodward. The written trails were compiled, edited and recorded by Julie McKiernan. The historical information was researched from Dr. Lund's A History of Lee, Lee Local History Publication No. 20, Pubs of Lee Revisited, Lee Town Centre Trail, Walks Around Lee by Richard Bond, Old Lee Photographs Facebook page, and Archives, Wigan and Lee. All information was fact-checked by Michael Caine. All modern photographs were produced by Dan Carty. All other images were supplied by Archives, Wigan and Lee, or other sources identified on the images themselves. The audio trails were edited and produced by Chris Boyle. We would particularly like to thank GMVCO, the Greater Manchester Centre for Voluntary Organisation, for awarding us a GM Mental Wellbeing Small Grant to fund this project.